Okay, so welcome everyone. As I just said, this is the Portsmouth Public Library's local history event, Seals in Society, Lessons on Conservation, Resilience, Research, and Discovery. My name is Katie Chkowski, and I'm the Special Collections Librarian, and I am joined tonight by my colleague, Nicole Luongo-Cloutier, who is the Supervisor of Special Collections and Reference, and we are presenting from the Portsmouth Public Library in the city of Portsmouth, New Hampshire, which is on the homelands of the Abenaki people, who have ongoing cultural and spiritual connections to this area. According to tribal oral tradition, Abenaki people have lived in the place now called New Hampshire for more than 12,000 years, since before tribal memory. The Abenaki are part of a larger group of indigenous people who call themselves Wabanaki, or people of the dawn, and form one of many communities connected by a common language family. Here at the Portsmouth Public Library, we are committed to acknowledging and honoring the human history tied to this land. So tonight's event will last until 8:30, and we plan to be respectful of your time. If you have questions during the presentation, please put them in the chat and I'll share them with Dr. Dre at the end of the talk. The chat box can be opened by clicking on the chat button, which looks like a little speech bubble at the bottom of your screen. And we also have captions on tonight, and you can hide those by clicking on the caption button also at the bottom of the Zoom window. So before we start, there are a couple upcoming library programs that might be of interest to you. Tonight's event is part of our local history series, and the next installment of the series will be on Tuesday, August 17th, when we'll be hosting Dr. Sarah Korchesny, who will be talking about the gulls of Appledore Island. And if you're interested in genealogy, we have two upcoming workshops. The first is this Thursday, July 15th from 6 to 8 p.m. Sipperly Good from the Penobscot Maritime Museum will be teaching us how to research our maritime ancestors. And on Thursday, August 20th, Brenna O'Sullivan will guide us through the digital collections available from the Library of Congress and the National Archives and Records Administration. Both are excellent opportunities to start learning about genealogy or to expand your knowledge of genealogical resources, and both require registration, which you can do by visiting our online calendar. And I will include a link for that in the chat towards the end of tonight's event. We love hearing from you about what you'd like to see at the library, so we'll share an online event feedback form in the chat. If you fill it out, you'll help the library and you'll be entered to win a Portsmouth Public Library tote bag. The bag must be picked up in person at the library, so the contest is only open to those who can travel to Portsmouth. Thank you all for being here for tonight's event. We're very excited because this is the first of our local history programs under the summer reading theme of Tales and Tales. And we love this theme this year because it gives us an opportunity to talk more about animals, like the seals you'll hear about tonight, as well as folklore and mythology. So I encourage you to all visit the library and see our display that highlights both topics. Or if you aren't in Portsmouth, visit your own local library and see what they've got going on for the summer. And I'm sure they've picked out tons of great titles for you to enjoy as well. And if you are a member of our library, you can create an account on Beanstack to log your reading hours and win prizes. This is not just for kids. The prizes go from pins and stickers to a library tote bag and a set of note cards with really beautiful watercolors painted by local artist Sarah Haven Foster. Enough about the prizes though. Let me introduce you to tonight's speaker, Dr. Andrea Bogomolni. Dr. Dre is a community scientist as well as many other ists, a naturalist, artist, biologist, and conservationist with a passion for the ocean. Working with a range of collaborators from scientists to fishermen to artists, she aims to understand not just seals, but our human relationship with the natural world and ways we can help preserve, protect, and sustainably make use of the limited resources nature provides. She has an interdisciplinary skill set in scientific research, education, and outreach. Her bachelor's degrees are in studio art and wildlife, fisheries, and conservation biology from UC Davis. Her master's is in marine biology from Boston University, and her doctorate is in pathobiology and veterinary science with a certificate in public health from UConn. She was a postdoctoral fellow and guest investigator at the Woods Hole oh my gosh, I'm gonna completely mess this word up. I'm gonna skip the.
Just say hooey, that's what we call it.
Great. Thank you. She has taught marine mammal science and conservation courses at several institutions and began the seal research program at the Shoals Marine Lab a decade ago. She currently teaches marine mammal biology at the Massachusetts Maritime Academy and is the chair and co-founder of the Northwest Atlantic Seal Research Consortium. Through all her work, she hopes to amplify the voices of those that can provide the knowledge needed to mitigate human impacts as we manage ocean ecosystems. So, Dr. Dre, I will hand it over to you.
Thank you. And I'm going to attempt to share my screen and cross my fingers. Here we go. All right. Does that work? Oop. Yeah? Okay, awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me and being able to talk about subjects that I absolutely love. And I think it fits hopefully into your tales and tales in many ways, including obviously the tale of seals here. But the other tale that I'm so excited to talk about is this really, as I call it, a contentious, complex, and controversial relationship that we have and have had through history with seals in our waters, and give you a little bit more insight to why do I study seals? Why should we care about them? And what's happening right in your backyard? So with that, I wanted to start by kind of taking a step back and realizing that seals and humans have had this relationship for a very long time. And part of that goes back into many different cultures as well. And one of my absolute favorite folklore stories is about SEDNA. She's the goddess of the sea, of marine mammals, and ruler of the Inuit underworld. And to make her story short, make it really short, you should look it up. But she was cast aside. She fell into the ocean after a longer story, and her fingers became the ocean animals. They first became the pinnipeds, the seals and the sea lions and the walruses, and later the dolphins and the whales. And the story goes that as people harvest or overtake or take too much of the ocean, she becomes upset. So in order to appease her, you have to not take more than you need from the ocean, and she'll be happy. If not, she causes storms and she'll cause it to be less available catch, let's say, of the needed resources. So this relationship of understanding the natural world and pinnipeds, or seals in particular, goes back in distance, time, and space as well. More people, I think, are familiar with the story about selkies. So that's another folklore story that involves seals. And the selkies are women who have the form of seals, or seals that have the form of a woman. And when they come on land and their pelt is hidden, they stay. And very similarly, many times the story goes that it's fishermen that find a selkie. And if a fisherman or a man is not treating the seal or this woman correctly, she'll go back to sea. So again, there's this really sort of give and take relationship with seals. And there's this great story called Song of the Sea. If you've never seen it, it's a great modern day version of the selkie story. But again, just this stories that go back many, many generations about our relationships with these animals. And one of my other favorite stories is actually about a real selkie. This is a selkie who is the oldest gray seal in captivity, who lived to be 43 years old. And her story is fascinating to me because she's actually a former Navy SEAL. So she was trained during the Cold War by the United States to use a screwdriver, and she was used in operations. So gray seals, and seals in particular, have a very interesting history with us, and they're smarter than people think. That's the other part of the story. But a little known fact that gray seals were once used in our military. But this relationship isn't just folklore, it's true to life about what we have encountered through history. And we know there's at least 4,000 years of seals in human history in our own coastline right here that goes back, and we have that evidence from the middens, or we call it like the kitchen trash heaps that were left behind by Native people in our region, showing that they consumed seal, worked with the bone of seals, and we have that evidence for us to go back to and look at. So from Maine to Massachusetts down into Long Island, we have evidence of this relationship with humans. So now let's fast forward a couple thousand years, to the point where we had Western expansion. We had people coming over from Europe, settling onto the Eastern seaboard. And this idea of, I'm going to go back a second here, where it says seals went from being seasonal to year-round hunting activity. It was still just for, we say, for subsistence. Our resources were taken at a level before this that were just about what we needed, not more. When we had Western expansion and exploitation in the 19th century, we started diminishing pretty much everything in our ocean, from the whales to the fish. The picture on the left is New Bedford Harbor in Massachusetts, and all those barrels are whale oil from pretty much from sperm whales and other large whales. And then on the right, same location, but really looking at how much fish was taken, to the point where people did realize, as this quote says, the belief that there was this inexhaustibility of the oceans had become apparent, that this wasn't the case. And so we came to a point where we were having this relationship with not just seals, but our oceans in a way that was unsustainable. And what that led to, when it comes to talking about seals in that story, was bounty hunts. And a bounty hunt was put into place in the 1800s, and in the late 1800s, on seals, because of a perception. And bounty hunts are taking for a prize or for a reward, not for necessarily consumption or use. And this bounty was placed because there was a perception of competition with fisheries when the seals were there. And this is a news article back in the 1880s, specifically up in Maine. It says, bounty of snouts and flippers, both sport and profit in seal hunting on Maine coast. What's interesting to me is it says, not for years and years have seals been so numerous in the Maine coast. And I find that to be interesting when you go back historically and we have those numbers about how many seals might have been there. They were doing pretty well before exploitation. So it got to the point where all these seals were actually extirpated from our waters. Harbor seals and gray seals are the main species that we talk about in New England. And it got to the point in 1965 where Massachusetts passed the Gray Seal Protection Act. There were 0 gray seals left by the 1960s, none. There were none in the US. And for harbor seals, there were a couple hundred. That was it, that people could find. And this reward, or I should say not reward, the fines that were put on if somebody were to harm any seal that they saw was a pretty big amount. I think back in the day it was $500 for a fine, because people realized they were gone. It wasn't until 1972 that there were protections through federal agencies or federal protection for all marine mammals. And I think it's really interesting that that first protection was actually for gray seals in our waters. And the US Marine Mammal Protection Act is the first US ecosystem-based management law to have ever been passed. And contrary to what some people think, I would say it's not because they were, cute or blubbery or had cool teeth like a walrus. The reason this protection was put into place is because of the primary objective of what they do in our ecosystem. It says the primary objective of this management must be to maintain the health and stability of the marine ecosystem. These animals were being taken out and exploited without knowing what the consequences would be for ecosystem health. And that's often overlooked when we talk about marine mammal conservation and seals. So we're going to fast forward now, like 40, 50 years. And finally, we're at this point where we can say, success. So protection of animals, of habitat, of air and water, all of this was happening at the same time. And we have a success story that's something now that we can celebrate. And this is Muskeget Island off of Nantucket Sound. This is the largest gray seal rookery in the US. And all those white dots right here, those are gray seal pups. These are their moms, and there's some wily males waiting for the females here offshore. And it's amazing. In this short amount of time, relatively 50 years, we've had an increase in the population of our seals, or our pinnipeds. And this is data from Stephanie Wood that shows just how well this recovery is going. So Muskeget and Monomoy are off the coast of Massachusetts, and the rate of increase in the population goes from 12 to 26%. Seal Island and Green Island are in Maine, and you can see that it's not just the recovery, but the increase in pup production is slowing down, probably because those animals are going to Muskeget and Monomoy. But it's a success story. We're seeing this increase occur. But with this increase, we're also seeing a lot of conflict. I like to say that, for some people, we went from 0 to 60 in no time flat. And it's very hard for people to understand what is happening in this time frame when 3 generations ago, we had no seals because they were hunted to near extinction. And so these are some of the headlines that you can read in papers. These go back to 2013. It says gray seals population plague or pleasure. New England fishermen and residents back the call of the exploding gray seal population. And the headlines keep going. My favorite, I always tell people, is when I hear words like tsunami of seals, or that they're exploding and we should get rid of them. They're bringing in the sharks, and how are we going to solve this problem? To the point where even local elected officials have called for the cull of seal populations. So it's getting a little tenuous, right? There's a lot happening and a lot of feelings behind this increase. So where do we go from here? What do we do with that? How do we reckon and how do we coexist in a world where we have this balance of increasing populations with living in a place where we haven't had this in a long time? So colleagues and myself got together to figure out this. How do we help seals and humans better coexist? And put together an organization called the Northwest Atlantic Seal Research Consortium. Basically, it's a volunteer network that helps to facilitate conversations and help produce unbiased scientific research, working collaboratively with anyone with an interest. And it's been really successful in making sure we get the conversations going so that we can work toward finding answers that we need in order to coexist, hopefully, right? That's the goal. So what do we know now? It really is, hopefully I can share with you some of what we're learning and how we're getting to learn what we do know. But before that, a little bit of background. Why should we care, right? That's a big question. Besides this contentious nature, why should we care about seals? For me, that has always been related to my ocean, I say, and what we do to our ocean and how we understand it. And really, truly, that to me is health, the health of our ocean and understanding what we need to keep it healthy. And seals offer us this really great opportunity to understand what's happening in our oceans, from plastics to garbage to warming oceans, to viruses, to anything that's out there. Seals are giving us a clue to what's actually happening. And I call them, and many people call them, sentinels. And a sentinel, if you look it up in a dictionary, is a person or thing that watches or stands with watching, a soldier stationed as a guard to challenge all comers and prevent a surprise attack. And that's exactly what I see when I see seals like this. This is off the coast of Chatham in my backyard, so I'm on Cape Cod right now. And all of those black dots are seals. And for many people here, they start to panic. They're like, that's a lot of animals. And for me, what I see is this opportunity to look at something that gives us an indication about what's happening in our own backyard, and they're sentinels. So all those black dots to me are an indicator for us to know what's happening in our oceans. And I am so grateful that I get a chance to study seals, not just off my backyard on Cape Cod, but come to the Isle of Shoals and Appledore Island to understand what's happening in the greater Gulf of Maine, not just here, and looking at those seals as indicators of what's happening in the greater region, not just for the seals, but for ourselves as well. This is Appledore, the Shoals Marine Lab. And if you haven't been or don't know where those islands are, they're right offshore. And that's the Isle of Shoals. And in the Isle of Shoals, more specifically, even smaller than that, besides Appledore, there's a smaller group of islands called Duck Island and Ledges. And that's, for me, where the action happens. That's where my seals are hauled out and live for most of the year, as far as we know. And on Duck Island and Ledges, there's a really great population of harbor seals and gray seals that we can monitor continuously and find out more and more about what's happening if we start paying attention. And that's exactly what I feel so fortunate to have had the absolute pleasure of being able to do over the last 10 years. So every year we do the same survey route over and over, hopefully 30 to 40 times this summer. And that's this track line that goes around these ledges. And we do that so we have consistent standardized data that we can go back to year after year. The boat captains know this survey really well. And We get even finer scale because we can identify each of these ledges. And what we do is we number them. Each one of the rocks has a number, and my students who work there are incredible. They're way better at remembering which is which than I am. And I'll just point out one, because we'll talk about it later, but we call this 3S or 3 South, and that's on Eastern Rock. So we go around and we look for the seals, we count them, and we try and identify them as well. So what we document at Duck Island is a lot, actually, of what we can see out there. The first data point that we look for is just how many are there? That's like always the big question. And I know this graph has a lot happening, but really what it's showing is from all these years up to 2019, last year, our surveys were a little shorter because of COVID, so I didn't include that. What we see are these interesting trends. And for me, one of the most interesting is that we see for our harbor seals, we have this increase, and then we started seeing a decrease. So when you get long-term data sets, it's not just point, but you can start seeing trends. And that's exactly what we're able to do with our seal populations out there, which is really incredible. We can also look for tags and unique markings. Scientists like me do strange things and sometimes put hats on seals. That's an actual hat tag on a seal. In Canada, they also brand seals. Those are numbers. And we can put flipper tags on the back of seals as well. So that way, if you see them again, we can actually recite and hopefully know what animal that was that we had our hands on. These animals can get reported to the Marine Animal Identification Network, which is a citizen science site that if you can report any interesting finding of marine life, but specifically seals, if they have unique markings, entanglements, coloration, or tags like that hat tag. And you can go through this and report your sighting. You can also go through this site and look for tags. If you saw something, you're like, I think I saw something blue on the back of the seal. You can go through this and find out who put that blue tag and contact the researcher organization directly as well. The other way you can identify seals, which I appreciate, is just through their natural markings. So you don't have to be a scientist. I always have tags nearby, but these are the tags. We can see this, that if you have an animal in hand, you can put on their flipper, but they have markings that are great without us putting our hands on them. And this is my absolute favorite seal. This is Mr. T. And you can see that T on his side, and that's there since the day they're born and have their fur come in till the day that they're not alive anymore. And those markings will stay their whole life. So what we can do with that marking or this individual photo ID is look for site fidelity. And remember, I was talking about those areas called 3S or 3 South. We know that Mr. T has been seen for 10 years, every year, and he has a preference for one rock on those ledges at 3 South is where we find him most often. So it's incredible what we conceive in that great scale of the Gulf of Maine down to the Isles of Shoals, down to Duck Island, down to one rock, and how important that one rock is for these animals. And we can tell a lot too over time about their health just by taking a picture. And that's one of the most extraordinary, powerful tools that we have too, is just capturing what's happening to these animals. We've seen diseases, we've seen injuries, we see a lot of entanglements, and we try and document this and report this to our marine mammal stranding partners at Seacoast Science Center, Marine Mammals of Maine, and also in Gloucester through NOAA Fisheries as well. And one of the most challenging aspects that we record and make known is that we do have a really big problem with entanglement. So seals are very curious. They eat fish, they go around nets, they like to explore, and sometimes they end up with things on them that they shouldn't. And we'll go through some of these a little more in depth, so I can go through them a little more up close for you. But 1% of the gray seals and up to 4% of seals near me, where I am right now on the Cape, are entangled. And if you look and think about how many animals that is through the whole population of animals, it adds up. It's a lot of animals. And on the Cape, what we know is that almost 50% of those cases of seals that have died, especially gray seals, are due to entanglement. And those entanglement cases are mostly from net. What we have documented is that in some cases, in some years we have more, in some years we have less at the Isle of Shoals. But we can identify uniquely that there were 16 unique gray seals and 12 unique harbor seals, say, as an example, in 2018. And we can understand more about those individual animals, not just that they were entangled, but can we go back and see if we'd seen them before? When did they get entangled? So there's a lot of information we can get. We also try and characterize the material that's on them. Most often what we see is monofilament line. Usually it's gillnet, but it can be recreational fishing line as well. And we can tell by the type of entanglement. And because seals are curious, sometimes they get into things they shouldn't. This is an aerobie frisbee. They're the frisbees that have a big hole in the center and they get stuck in them. So all kinds of things that we're looking out for out there. One of the other tools in our toolbox is using images taken from drones, and you need a special permit. Right now, Dr. Michael Moore is one of the sole people that has a permit to do this with many permits in place. So this isn't something that anyone should go out and do. This is very highly regulated, but with this drone, you can go and take images that are so amazing and crystal clear so that we can count. Usually we're on a boat doing the surveys, not up in the air. And this is just to give an example of how clear those photos are. This is a mom and pup harbor seal that we can get from those images with that drone and that really great camera. So what it lets us do is count seals in a different way. We do this as a supplemental survey. We've done this a couple times. It's harder to do. And also what we are able to do is actually look for seals that are entangled. And I know it's hard to see here, but when you get up close, you can see an entanglement on that animal. And with this, we can figure out how many seals are entangled and how does that look across the board when we look at other areas in the Gulf of Maine. What we do know at the Isle of Shoals, and this is just for gray seals and very limited surveys, it's about 1% of the seals that are out there. And other areas like Chatham, which is off of Cape Cod and Monomoy, that number is closer to 4%. So it's a study that's really worth pursuing and doing more because it has huge implications for the health of these animals. But there's other ways we can find out the health of these animals in our world out there, and it involves what I appreciate, which is teamwork and a lot of assistance from friends and colleagues to track, tag, sample, and do cooperative research and counting. So we're learning a lot just from taking these images around the Isle of Shoals. But sometimes when we do seal research, we're fortunate in that we can actually get animals in hand and do research that way. And my favorite by far are when we get to work with small pups that are a little more easy to handle, like this one. And what we do is when we get them in hand, we try and go as quickly and carefully as we can to take samples that are used for many, many, many types of research to understand incredibly wonderful research. And the teams that go out are usually 15 to 20 people. It can be that big at a time so that we can maximize the work that's being done. And swabs are taken to look for different pathogens. Blood samples are taken as well. And we put these little tags on them so we can recite them, like at the Isle of Shoals if they go up there. And then also we take samples that are so important to me. We take fecal samples, which I'll talk about a little bit more later and tell you why they're so important. But just as an example of what these animals are telling us about our world, this is a study that goes back to 2005 that was done in Maine at Mary, just kind of giving an idea of seals telling us about contaminants in the Gulf of Maine. So they tell us about persistent organic pollutants like PCBs and DDT. And the numbers that you see here are very high. PCBs and DDT have been banned for 30 to 40 years, but they're still in our system and still in our waters. And I always say to people, you probably don't know how much is in you, but we can find out how much is in a seal. And that's a proxy to understand how much you might be exposed to. And part of those conflicts going back to, the 1800s is that there's this real world example of competition with fish. We eat similar fish, and also a little bit different. It's where they eat in the food chain that's very important. So they give us a sense of what's happening in our waters when we may not know what's happening to ourselves. The more recent studies, I guess, or concerns, and I just wanted to bring this up because it's fascinating, is this something that we don't know why it's happening, but we're seeing it more and more, and it's called alopecia, or loss of hair. And the seal over here, if you can tell, looks more like an elephant. It's lacking fur, and that's not normal. There seems to be an increase in this happening in our waters, specifically a little bit further south, but we're keeping an eye on this as we start seeing these animals go closer to the Isle of Shoals as well. Most of these observations have been seen in live seals. Most of these observations have been found here in Massachusetts, but we're seeing cases increase as well as we go further north. The rate of this increase and why it's happening may be due to several reasons. Just like people, it's caused by stress response, and we're not quite sure why. So just something to keep an eye on. I always love bringing up information and say, I don't know, we have no idea. We have to keep, really understanding. And the only way to do that is to have these long-term data sets like we have at the Isle of Shoals. The other really interesting topic that's talked about more and more these days, thankfully, are plastics, and that's from macro to micro. And you've all seen already the macroplastic on these animals, like the Roby frisbee and some of this monofilament gear or netting that is on these animals that causes severe injury. But also we know we can find plastics that are micro, and microplastics are becoming a bigger issue. And my colleague, Lisa Setti, who comes out to the Isle of Shoals as well, has one of the first papers looking at these micro plastics or elements in seals to figure out, is it affecting them? What is it doing as well? So what do we know? What are some of the things that I can share with you? I think that are some of the biggest questions that I'm asked, and hopefully I can give you some answers as well to take with you about what all is cumulative knowledge, whether it's looking at seals at the Isles of Shoals or on Cape Cod in our bigger Gulf of Maine. What are we learning? What do we know? There's so much we don't know, but there's stuff we do know too. A big question I always get asked is how many seals are there now, and where did they come from? I started my story saying that seals were extirpated. They went down to zero, which means they had to repopulate from somewhere, right? And they came from somewhere in order to repopulate their historical pupping grounds. And where they came from is this little tiny island here called Sable Island, especially the gray seals, where there wasn't hunting and wasn't pressure on them. So that's Sable Island in Canada, and where the seals in our waters from Massachusetts up to Maine really recolonized from. Right now, there's about 70,000 harbor seals and about 500,000 gray seals in the entirety of the Northwest Atlantic. I have to always remind people, we don't have Cape Cod seals or Maine seals, we have Northwest Atlantic seals, and they utilize this entire region for their life. So what do seals eat? I would say that's the other big question that I'm always asked, or told, maybe it could be a better way to say it, that I'm told this is what they eat. But through research of many studies over and over for both gray seals and harbor seals, what we know is that they're generalists. They eat what's abundant around them. And it's a really important fact to take away, that that's where they live, and where they live is where they eat. And this is such an important but simple concept to remember, is that seals eat things in the ocean. That's where they live. So before we get into the specifics of what they eat, we have to remember that ecosystems are complex. So before we start talking about diet and specifics, taking a step back is so important. And when we look at these ecosystems and ask that what we think is such a simple question about what they eat, this is what we have to look at and think about. We have top predators in our ocean. We have mesopredators. We have fish, reptiles, birds. We have invertebrates, phytoplankton, zooplankton. And in this mishmash of a food web, we have to figure out, how do things fit? And this is where seals fit. They're mesopredators. They've only been top predators because we also, in addition to seals, remove their top predators from the ocean, the large sharks. And so as ecosystems come back into balance, as protections are being put into place, Seals are regaining their place in the ecosystem. That is where they were, I would say, historically meant to be before we exploited the waters around us. All right, now we can get to what do seals eat more specifically, and remembering that seals are mesopredators and how important that is. So remember I said too that that really cool sample that I love is the fecal sample or the scat sample. It's really important because that's where we find a lot of this diet data when we get our hands on these live animals, or if you're at a beach and see some seal poop lying there. And that can give us information about what they're eating. And I say this is their inshore diet. What do we find when we look at these fecal samples? And what we find, and this is for gray seals, and gray seals and harbor seals are different animals, but some of these numbers are very similar, is that they primarily eat sand lance. These really small forage fish makes up half of their diet or more. And a very small percent inshore consists of gattids, or what we think of a lot of times. We always hear seals are eating all the cod, and cod is a very small percent when they're inshore. What they do eat when they're offshore differs. And the way that we look at what's eaten offshore is by looking at animals that were incidentally caught in fishing nets. And if you know me, I'm an optimist and I always try and make the best of every situation. And to me, this is a great example. When a seal is caught in a fishing net, we have an observer program that goes out and brings these animals back. They're fishery observers. And we get these animals back and we can look in the stomachs and look at what they ate. And we can use various methods to do this. And this is data that's from Fred Wenzel from 2017, but it's 25 years of data. And consistently what we see is that they're eating this fish called hake, silver, red, and white hake. And that's consistent through time in what I see as well over the years. And that's the primary part of their diet. And the reason for that is that's what is abundant. They're eating what's abundant, they're generalist, and that's what they're feeding on. Notice in these numbers, we're not seeing things like cod in great numbers. They eat what's abundant. They may eat it, as a friend says, they like going to McDonald's once in a while, but their meat and potatoes are these fish like sand lance or hake that are abundant. And the other part to realize or to talk about when we talk about diet in these animals is what do they do besides just eat, right? That's sometimes what we think about. They just eat everything. But what they're really doing is maintaining ecological stability. And how do seals maintain ecological stability? So predatory fish are the greatest predators of other fish. This is a very well-known fact. Fish eat fish. Problems that we have is when we see an increase of small pelagic fish like hake, we can see that result in the failure of other species to thrive. And it's been hypothesized that increases in these fish like hake have been contributing to the failure of things like cod to recover. And the reason is that hake eat the small cod, the eggs, and the larvae. So it causes an imbalance when you have too much of these small pelagics. Seals eat these species of fish, these hake, these voracious predator. And this happens worldwide. Wherever there's fish like this is what's preferred by seals. So they play a really important role in the system if they're able to be where they belong, which is mesopredators. So thankfully, that's what we're seeing. The other way they can maintain ecological stability, which I love as a story, is that just by being a seal. So why am I showing you a picture of seals and horses? This is Sable Island in Canada, that little island that helped the recolonization of seals after they were extirpated. And on this island are horses and seals and a couple of researchers. And seals lying on the beach, they poop. It's there, and what that does is it fertilizes and gives nutrients to the beaches, causing the grasses to grow, and there's food for the horses. So they've actually seen less beach erosion and increased health in the horses because of the presence of seals. And the same type of interactions are being studied here on the Cape Cod National Seashore, and show that when seals are present, there's increase of nutrients on the beaches, which is increasing potentially the dune grasses. So all these really intricate things that are happening takes time to understand. And again, why long-term data sets and looking at things in that long-term are so critical. And again, when it goes back to how do seals maintain the stability, again, they're mesopredators. And if you haven't heard yet, there are sharks in our ocean, and I think it's still Shark Week, perhaps, right? But if you haven't heard, we are getting a return as well, not just of seals, but of these large predators, because of the same types of protections that were put in place, not just for the species, but for their water, for their habitat as well. And another question we often get, I'd say no matter where you are, is this: have great white sharks and seals lived here before? Have they been in the Gulf of Maine? And the answer to that is yes. Once again, we have a short memory as humans, and we have to go back maybe a couple generations. But these were sharks that were caught in the 1930s. These are great whites, and they were present, and they were here. They didn't just appear, they were here, and they've always been here. This is a video, I'm hoping this works, similarly of seals. This is the earliest I've been able to find of the presence of seals closer to here in Massachusetts. This is from Woods Hole in 1938 as well, of 2 harbor seals that were captured and put in this small pen down in Woods Hole, Massachusetts. But there's plenty of evidence that these animals were here before they were hunted out to and almost extinct in our region. And this photo for me really says a lot. This is when I first started getting involved in marine mammal work with the Cape Cod Stranding Network. And this is a gray seal that has an obvious shark bite from a great white shark, confirmed, from 1999. So we know that these animals have been here, they've been interacting, and as we see recovery of both species, we can confirm that yes, these animals have been here before. And we need them. We need healthy predators for a healthy ocean. Through the consortium, we work with the White Shark Conservancy here, really trying to get this message across that in order to have a healthy ocean, we need to have our top predators and our mesopredators present so that we do have healthy oceans for all. Remember again, what are seals telling us? They're really telling us about the health of the ocean. And a really important part of that is where they fit and what else is actually affected by them or to them as well. Oftentimes the stories about what is important in our oceans, I always say, gets put onto the whales or the sharks, and the seals are often left behind. And this is to give you an example of just how important looking at these species is on so many levels. The International Monetary Fund actually did an estimate of how valuable, what is the value of a marine mammal, of a whale in particular, and said that it's easily over $1 trillion for the current stock of gray whales. That's their worth or their value. And what is one whale worth and how is that measured? It's really looking at how much they're contributing to our ecosystem. Again, think about that ecosystem stability. What are they giving? And I challenge everybody to look at this picture differently and think about it as if we were thinking about seals and what they are contributing and what their value is in our ecosystem as well. Oftentimes we're looking at them as a negative, but there's so much in the exact same way that they're contributing to our waters, from producing nutrients through fecal content, monitoring that stability of ecosystems by being a mesopredator, and going back even through death and adding nutrients again to the bottom of the sea, just like whales do. So just a different perspective of really how we can think of these animals. And why do we care about seals? Why do I care about seals? Why should we all care about seals? If I haven't, I guess explained it or really expressed it, they're truly sentinel species. These animals give us an indication of the health of our oceans and ourselves. And to me, that in itself is a reason to care. They also have important ecological roles, and many of these we're just beginning to understand as these populations are able to increase. We haven't even gotten to the point to look at a system where in our own waters, they're at a level that is plateaued. They're still increasing because they're still at a point where they haven't even reached historical numbers. They're really huge contributors if you're thinking about what's their value to the blue economy and ecotourism in many locations. And I think ultimately as well, and something that's so important, is they give us a way to explain and to understand ocean stewardship. For me, seals are easier to get to, maybe not at the Isle of Shoals, but you can go just right off the Seacoast Science Center, anywhere near you, and see if you can see seals in a way that's more accessible. And I think that's truly one of the great benefits of seals, right? They're hauled out, we say, on shore or on rocks. We can go see them. Oftentimes you don't need to have a boat that goes very far, and they're there. So it's a great way to increase our knowledge base and share that just joy of understanding something else in our world and our oceans. So that is why I think we should care about them, but also why they are such a complex and sometimes contentious part of our world. And there's still so much more that we have to learn from them. And I think just really paying attention and using these long-term data sets and just watching is so essential to that. So with that, I hope time-wise I've kept you all here. But I'd love to answer any questions you have. And I know that that's a lot, but I definitely get very excited about the topic. So thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Dre. That was awesome. So packed full of information.
So much. I know it's a lot, so please definitely ask away if you have questions, and all those ties together.
Yes, and no questions came in through the chat, but you were welcome to unmute yourselves and ask questions out loud. You don't have to type it in. I know that can be
long. And should I stop sharing or keep it shared?
It's up to you.
Okay.
It's kind of nice to see the seals.
I know, it's so cool. It's horses and seals.
We did just get a question from Chris in the chat, who asked what the difference between a harbor seal and a gray seal is.
Oh, great question. So in this picture right here, those are gray seals. Gray seals are a lot larger than harbor seals. They're about, when they're large, they're about 600 to 800 pounds. Harbor seal is about 200 to maybe 300 pounds. So you have a really big harbor seal. They have different breeding times. So gray seals nurse and pup in the winter. In December, and harbor seals go up to Maine, all of them, to go pup, most of them, in April or May. And so it's a big difference too about where they're located and where they're breeding. They're just different, very different sizes is one way to tell them apart. And then for gray seals, you can tell the difference. And there's one, I don't know if you can see my arrow, but they have these long noses, which is why they're often called horse heads. Or Halicorus gripus, which means hook-nosed sea pig. So the harbor seals have like little snouts like a cocker spaniel, and most gray seals have this longer horse head type snout.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's a good question.
Other questions? I have a question. Do the horses and the seals get along? Do they ever interact?
Not that I'm not the expert on that. I wish I could go to Sable Island and give you that answer myself. I need to get out there. But I've never heard of anything happening between them. I would imagine that, you know, they could probably step on the seals if they had to like get across, but it's such a big island. It looks like a little crescent moon, that there's plenty of room for them. But I have never heard of any interactions, so I don't know.
Speaking of the seals out on the Isles of Shoals, though, are they, so you showed us Duck Island and the ledges. Are seals ever seen on the more, the islands that I guess see more people, like Star Island or Appledore?
Yeah, it's a great question. Occasionally we'll get reports in the on season, but because there's people, it doesn't create a really great habitat for them to rest. So if there's people or disturbances, seals won't be present. So most of the other islands actually have people like Star Island coming and going. In the wintertime, though, there's been reports of seals that are out there in the wintertime, not in the large numbers that we see at Duck Island and Ledges. And part of that is because it is protected land. So Duck Island is, I think, U.S. Fish and Wildlife. It's protected. So technically you're not supposed to walk on it or be on it. So it really does provide great habitat for them to just rest.
That's great. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
A couple more questions actually came in through the chat. So Diana wants to know, why are seals viewed by some as negative?
Because they haven't heard this talk. No, no, so they're perceived as negative. It goes back again to that, going back to the 1880s competition. So because seals are in our presence, we see them, they're eating fish in our presence, they eat fish, that's a big part of it. They're considered a negative entity. And more recently, this connection to great white sharks has also increased this negative view that incorrectly, I should say, stating that we only have great white sharks because seals are present. And that narrative is a big piece of misinformation that has to be sort of like nipped in the bud of, we've always had these animals here, protections have been put on, they're coming back in these greater numbers, both species, and that includes also healthier oceans. We have healthier oceans and healthier fish stocks, and that allows for a healthier system to thrive. But because it's so easy for people to make these assumptions of, I always say A to B to C, it's never that straightforward and never that easy. Seals have historically always been the scapegoats for things that we've done wrong managing our oceans all the time through history. So it goes way back, and it's an easy target for people to really see. And to that, I always say too, most people don't know we have hundreds of thousands of dolphins in our oceans that also eat fish, but we see seals, we don't see the dolphins. They're great too.
Carol wants to know, do the two kinds of seals live together in the same places?
Oh, good question. So that's another reason the Isle of Shoals is so special in Duck Island, is we see both the species together, we say hauled out, which means that they're resting in the same place. And that doesn't always happen because of seasonality and where they're pupping or where they're living. That doesn't always happen, but we do see in the islands in Maine this overlap a lot of times. Sometimes the bigger seals, the gray seals, take up a little more space than the harbor seals, but it is a special place where we do see those two species side by side. Great question.
Paula asked in the chat, are you observing movement of the seals to new areas due to warming waters in the Gulf of Maine, or are they very faithful to the place where they were born?
Another amazing question. So far, we can't relate one to the other, but we've had students do work looking at correlates like temperature, wave height, direction of wind even, to see if we can start teasing out, are these potential correlatives to where we see seals and when. So I can't say definitively there have been differences, but as fish species move, we will see a change. And we're seeing that with fisheries stocks, like black sea bass is now further north. Other species are going further north as waters are warming. So it's something to keep an eye on. The part that's harder, and I think will be really important, is they don't have a lot of places to pop. And if those areas become impacted either by sea level rise or lack of resources, we might see some issues. So currently, again, why long-term data sets are so important is we really have to monitor, and all of you can be eyes on the water out there too, reporting what you see.
Janet wants to know if harbor and gray seals live in other parts of the world other than the Northwest Atlantic.
Yes, and I love these questions. Yes, so harbor seals are found, they're actually called common seals is another word. So we have them on the Pacific Ocean, we have them in the Northeast Atlantic, so the UK. They're found at least in areas further north, I should say, like north of the equator, north, on both sides of the Atlantic, and as well as in Europe, even toward like Denmark and Germany. Gray seals are found as well only in the Atlantic and the Baltic areas, so Northeast and Northwest Atlantic. So again, they're in the UK and they're in Ireland. And then the Baltic is the other place where there's a big population of gray seals. Yeah.
And Nicole would like to know, how would you suggest an average untrained person volunteer to get involved to help seals?
Oh, well, if you are in anywhere near Portsmouth, definitely talk to the Seacoast Science Center. They run the marine mammal stranding network for the region there. Up in Maine, it's Marine Mammals of Maine, and that's one of the best ways to get experience is to volunteer for Marine Mammal Stranding Networks. It's how I started 20-ish years ago, and there's tons of need to volunteer. Probably to start, just being eyes on the water as well is a really good start. Yeah.
And Philip and Linda would like to know, are there observations you want?
Yeah, I think so the Marine Animal Identification Network, it's that main.wholedu site, is a place where you can record observations. So if you see a seal that is tagged, branded, if you see a seal that's injured, please call a Marine Mammal Stranding Network first before reporting it to the main site because they need immediate help. If you see something unusual, just, I saw a harbor seal and a gray seal together for 5 days, the same ones or something like that, you can report that there too, anything interesting. We've actually had reports of deep sea creatures from an oil rig. You never know what we'll get, but whatever you do have, we are interested. If you think it's interesting, it's important. But those are the main things we're looking for, are markings, tags, and brands. And the reason is we will contact whoever tagged them because we need to know, we want to know where these seals are going. And that's the way that we can do it because there's no other way to track. Sometimes they'll have a satellite tag, like your cell phone kind of, that can tell you where the seal is going. But oftentimes all they have is this static little tag. And the only way to share that info is to get the number or the color of the tag. Good question.
That's all the questions in the chat right now. Does anyone else have any other questions? And like I said, you're welcome to unmute yourselves and ask questions out loud too.
Anything you've ever wanted to know about seals?
Ooh, someone asked, Paul asked, are there any albino seals?
Ooh, good question. I've never seen one myself, but I would imagine there must be at some level somewhere out there, but I don't know of any. I've never actually seen a picture of one, but in nature there has to be one, I guess, but I don't know. That's a great question.
You know what I'll be Googling later.
Yeah, I will too. I'm going to ask my colleagues if they've ever seen one.
Any other questions?
Well, I'm not afraid to say when I don't know things too. I'm more than happy to know things. Google. Google the colleagues and friends.
All right, well, there are no other questions right now, but yeah, if you do end up having any questions, you can definitely send them to me at the library and I can always get them to Dr. Dre, unless she wants to share her contact information, but no pressure.
Yeah, no, actually, yeah, here, I forget that I can chat here. This is, if you have any questions, there we go. I'm going to make sure I spelled my own name right. That's my email. And this is the site if you want to report anything you see. It's Maine, MAIN, Marine Animal Identification Network, not the state. .hui, which is the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution.edu. And you can report them there.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And thank you for having me. This is great.
Yeah. Thank you for joining us. This was a really great presentation. And thank you to everyone for joining us tonight. It was really great to have you here, and we'll be putting the recording up on our YouTube channel in the next few days. So if you want to share it with anyone who you think would be interested in a talk about seals, please feel free.